Welcome, wandering souls and lost sailors, to the Ship of the Dead podcast.
Welcome aboard, mateys. My guests today are Mike Mason and Paul Fricker, none other than Mike Mason and Paul Fricker, two of the top brass, if you will, at Chaosium, and the writers of Call of Cthulhu 7th edition. Gentlemen, welcome aboard the Ship of the Dead.
Thank you very much, Nick.
Hello.
I want to kind of jump back to your origins. We've hung out every couple of years. We get together to do this fun live stream, Pirate Borg live stream. But I wanted to share, behind the scenes, we've had several, deep dive conversations. And I wanted to share some of these origins that you guys both have shared with me. Tell us about your deep roots in the hobby. When did you first get exposed to RPGs? Was there like a transformational spark that set you off on this journey? Like, I think maybe, Paul, you were telling me about this zine that got passed around when you were first getting into the hobby. Give us the story about how you guys got sucked into this lovely lifestyle.
Okay, well, shall I kick off, Mike? Yeah. I was like, a young teenager, and a friend of mine, I was always looking to play games. I was the youngest in my family. The rest of my siblings had grown up, and I was always bugging people to play any game, whether it be Monopoly or cards or whatever. I just constantly wanted to play games. And then I was at school, and school life was pretty dull. But then a friend of mine came along and said, "Do you want to play a game on Friday evening in the canteen after school?" And I'm like, "Yeah, of course I do." So we went along, and it was a bunch of older kids. We were 13, they were 17. So they were years older than us, real grown-ups. And they sat around the table, and Frank, the guy, said to me, "Have you read Lord of the Rings?" And I was like, "No, but I've seen the movie. I've seen Ralph Bakshi's movie." And he's like, "Yeah, that's it." So we sit down, and on the table, there are these little painted figures and these weird shaped dice and a bunch of people having a great time just making stuff up. And I was entranced. And from that very session, I've been just captured ever since. All those things, draw. And when I think back, part of it, I think that I don't get so much nowadays. Part of it is that whole crafting thing of those little painted figures, the drawing, the map, all those kind of tactile things, all that stuff kind of sucked me in. That's where I began.
I feel like we probably all have that one moment where we walked by the table that most of school or normal society would think is what are those guys doing with those little miniatures? And we were all like, wait, what is happening there? I need to know more. Yeah.
And I'll tell you what, it was, I think it was the very start of 1981, and it wasn't all blokes. There were two women in the group, which, a lot of people harking back sort of say, oh, it was very male dominated. Well, it was, but that was my first experience.
Sure. Yeah. So is it safe to assume these guys were playing some form of D&D?
It is safe to assume. Yes. So that was Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. And I think we kind of played with them for one session. And then they were like, yeah, you know what you're doing now. Off you go. So next week we were on another table. We dragged a few of our other friends in, and they just gave us a few photocopied sheets from I think we had the tier tables from the DMG, and we had the spell tables and a few other little bits and pieces from the player handbook. And then we just made stuff up. What's Burning Hands do? I don't know. I guess it does 66 damage, and you just throws fireballs or something out of your hands. We didn't know. We just read the spell and made up a description.
I feel like this is a very popular theme for people especially back then, before YouTube and the internet. People were just making it up. I was making it up. We were well, I'm not going to read 300 pages to run this little goblin dungeon for my brother. There are goblins. They hurt you. How about you, Mike? Yeah.
Well, I didn't get my first exposure at school. It was a friend's birthday party. I'd been invited to a birthday party. All I knew is we were going to play a game. So I was kind of expecting Monopoly or something. And we turned up, and it was only three of us, and then the birthday friend's older brother and his friend, who was the one running this game, which turned out to be D&D. Obviously, we knew nothing about. Well, I didn't, but again, I was captivated by it because they had the cut-out cardboard floor plans, and they had miniatures, which were mainly skeletons and some wizards, I think. And I was captivated by the miniatures, and as Paul said, the strange, funny dice. And it was just a real immersion experience, and kind of like I didn't really understand what was happening, but I just knew I enjoyed it and it was fun. This would have been, again, about 1981. From there, it's all kind of like conspired to come together, because I did that. It was really cool. I kind of found out what the name of the game was, but didn't really know much else. And then my history teacher at school, literally like a few weeks later, completely independently, decided to start a paid games club, which was basically a role-playing games club, because he was into it. So he would go down to London and come back with a bag full of these miniatures, these 50p miniatures in little plastic bags stapled to a bit of cardboard, and he would then basically sell them to us. Who wants an ogre? And like, yes, and we'd all fight over who would get the cloud giant or whatever. Through that we started all painting and then playing the games and whatnot. So all my kind of close friends were doing it as well. We were all kind of doing it together, and we'd meet at the school club, and then we'd meet on a weekend and we'd play all day Saturday and all that kind of thing, with a bunch of different friends. And we don't have like lots of little groups happening with different people in different groups, and a lot of crossover kind of thing, but we're all kind of into it, and it just spiraled out of control from there, really. This was pre-red box D&D, I guess. It would be the what I call the purple box D&D, and then we were soon onto advanced D&D. It was and then onto other things, Traveller and RuneQuest and all the other wonders.
Yeah. So how did that early D&D experience transform into you being interested in writing and designing for the hobby? I mean, also at what point along this timeline does Call of Cthulhu show up?
Well, Cthulhu shows up in the UK around about 1983, 84. But it's not, I'm not really aware of it till probably 84 at the earliest, because it kind of appears and nobody really knows what it is in the UK. It's quite a niche thing. Nobody really gets it, because we're all still playing Traveller in D&D and whatnot. And it isn't until Imagine magazine, which is the old TSR UK in-house magazine for the UK, did an entire issue special on it, their Halloween issue, I think, on Call of Cthulhu, which then I got the chance to read about the game and understand what it was and go, this sounds really cool because I'm into horror. I should try this game. And that was kind of my introduction, really. And, TSR introduced me to Cthulhu, I think, in that sense. Then it's a long jump to actually even thinking about working in the games industry. Yeah. Many, many, many years pass, because I, like everyone else at that time and now, it was a hobby that I did for fun and wrote some adventures, ran the adventures, played in other people's games. And then probably around about sometime in the mid-90s, started to go to the odd convention in the UK, and that kind of plugged me into this wider world, because obviously at the time, no internet, as you say, and so all you've got is your own frame of reference, your own group, what's happening at your local game shop. That's it. And maybe the pages of White Dwarf magazine. That's it. There is nothing else you know. So, you don't even know if you're playing the game right, because you're just making it up. So you go to a convention, you kind of realize, you're playing the game right because everyone else is doing the same thing. That kind of plugs you into that kind of wider thing. And there's a motivation then when you go to conventions to actually write your own scenarios, to run them, because obviously everyone's played everything that's been published. There's a kind of need to do that. And that then started me on the path to forming what became the Cult of Keepers, which is, I did that as well as put out a fanzine called The Whisperer, which was basically a Call of Cthulhu fanzine. And it's through that, it was the fanzine more than the Cult of Keepers, wasn't it, Paul, where we kind of met?
Yeah, I'm not too sure. Okay, let's go with that.
I think it was a fanzine, because obviously that was had my address. So you got in touch, didn't you? Because we didn't live far away. Yeah.
Right, yeah.
But this is in the 90s, right?
Late 90s, yeah.
Well, so Paul, catch us up for you. What was your introduction to Call of Cthulhu, and then how did you end up reaching out to Mike?
Well, the same friend who said to me those years before, do you want to play a game on Friday evening in the school canteen? We were both down living in Plymouth on the south coast as about 19-year-olds. And he said to me, have you read any H.P. Lovecraft? And I was like, no. And so he gave me this book to read, and I read Pickman's Model that evening. And then he sort of said, we should play some Call of Cthulhu. And I was like, well, I've seen it, like Mike mentioned, in White Dwarf magazine. I'd seen the name, but I didn't really get what it was. It was some kind of horror game. And I wasn't a massive horror fan, but I was kind of intrigued with it. So I went out and picked up a copy. and we got it. And it's like, I'd played some games before where they were set in the modern day against horror. Like there was a game called Stalking the Night Fantastic, but you were kind of part of a team and you got automatic weapons and stuff like that. I remember. But this was like you were playing regular characters in the modern day, or in this with the 1920s. And we were like, well, I don't really see how that's going to work. Where's my sword? Where's the dungeon?
Yeah, where's the exciting part? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, just how do you role play that, you know? So we played, I came home with it, and one afternoon in a student place in Plymouth, me and my mate Phil, he played and I ran it. Just one-on-one, and I ran the paper chase, and it was great. And again, you know, we played quite a lot of like one-on-one scenarios, and that just kind of hooked me in. And it just seemed like a way of more about the story and more about the atmosphere and character than a lot of the games I'd played before. I still like those other games, but this game felt very different to me.
So it's interesting. It sounds like the pathway for you from reading Lovecraft to playing Call of Cthulhu is pretty short. Like that
very short.
Pretty short.
Probably maybe like days. Yeah.
Is it the same for you, Mike? Was it like the game is almost intrinsically like interweaved with his fiction?
Before I was into games and role playing, I'd always been a horror fan. I'd always, gone to my local secondhand bookshop and bought lots of horror anthologies, collections, and would devour those, when I was 6 and 8 years old kind of thing, and carried on. And so I'm pretty certain I would have read some Lovecraft back in the day, but didn't realize I was reading Lovecraft, if you know what I mean. I was kind of like reading all these authors, but not really paying attention to who the writer was. And so it wasn't until I got into the game, then I think I did what everyone else did at the time. It's like, hey, this is based on Lovecraft's writing. We should go and check that out. And then it became a game in itself, because at the time, Lovecraft's writing was pretty hard to find. There weren't many paperbacks on the current bookshelves. It was all secondhand stuff or imports from America. And so it became like living the game in a sense. You were trying to seek out these lost tomes of information. And that was part of the fun. And then you'd find one, and then you'd get it, and then you'd devour it and kind of go, oh, yeah, okay, I can see that's like the scenario that I've just read or we played last week. I can see where that kind of links to it. So the literature and the game in those days very much go hand in hand. But we soon exhausted Lovecraft because he didn't write that much. And so what spurred us on is reading a much wider breadth of writers, the Lovecraft Circle, August Aleth, then into like modern authors like Ramsey Campbell and Brian Lumley and so on and so forth. We may have started with Lovecraft, but to be frank, we soon left him behind and reading his circle at the time, but then into modern authors who were writing, be that, Clive Barker, who's not really a mythos author, but a great horror writer. So we were just reading around, mining them for ideas for games, really.
I'm wondering, like, you kind of scratched on this thing. Like for me, I was on AOL when I was really young. And then quickly after that, the internet, that was like my entrance to like finding out about all things, nerdy. But obviously you guys come from a slightly different timeline. Do you feel, obviously maybe some sense of nostalgia, but do you feel like something has been lost by this never-ending font of information that the internet provides us? Like, it kind of sounds like you think that maybe part of the hobby was better when you had to like have that sense of mystery and discover it all yourself. What do you guys think?
I don't think that made it better. It made it more accessible. It's much more accessible now. So just this afternoon, just today, I was on Blue Sky, and somebody was sort of saying about how their child was listening to, I can't remember, some band from like the 70s. And the other day I was just walking past the skate park, and there were like a few teenage boys, and they were listening to Jimi Hendrix Voodoo Child. And I'm like, great, but that's like nearly 60 years old. But it seems like now everything is available, whether it's music, whether it's fiction, whether it's games, it's all right here on this screen that I'm looking at right now. I can get any of it. And it doesn't matter whether it was created yesterday or 100 years ago. Mm-hmm. Almost certainly it's accessible. And that is both a good thing, because that accessibility to information and media, but it has, like Mike said, it's taken some of the mystique out of it. If you don't have to work for it a little bit, you don't feel the same achievement when you find that like rare record in a record store, or that secondhand game that you never thought you'd find in a secondhand stall or something. There was an excitement to that acquisition of stuff.
I'm going to jump in and go, like, I don't want to be misquoted here. I'm not saying it was it was better when things were hard to find. I'm just saying that was the fact of the case.
Yeah, sure. I'm not saying you're saying that.
No,
no.
Well, I think Paul is.
Yeah, I am. Yeah, I am. Okay, it was better. Everything was better when everything was shit.
Everything was better in the 1970s. Honestly, I actually think it's a really good thing. I think Paul agrees. It really is. It's a very good thing. The accessibility is. You can get it now, because literally I would have conversations back in the day with the people, my friends who were playing games, and we would literally ask each other, do you think we're playing this game right? Because we had no frame of reference. It's only us and a bits and pieces of text. And it would bother us because we thought, maybe we're doing it wrong. I don't know. And it wasn't until later when we discovered other people and watched them and saw how they played that we kind of realized, no, we're all doing the same thing. It's all good. But there was a genuine kind of concern, maybe we don't want to turn up and play with somebody else and embarrass ourselves because we're doing it all wrong, kind of thought. Back in the day, role-playing was a niche thing. Yeah. It was just a few of us who knew about it. And you know what? That was really cool because we were special and we knew the secret sauce and we knew what it was and nobody else did. And so, it was cool, or we thought we were cool because it was all secret. Yeah. And, and the worst thing in the world would be if everyone knew about it, because then it wouldn't be our special thing anymore. And I've been in business meetings where that has been a conversation. I actually think that's the reason why role-playing has taken nearly 50 years to become a mainstream thing, because it was gatekeepered for so long. It was a secret thing and it wasn't made accessible for everyone. The accessibility, the fact that people can find out about it really easily, they can watch people playing, they can access the materials for virtually nothing and give it a go, has opened the gates to role playing, and that's why I think it is a mainstream thing in that sense now compared to what it used to be, and that's purely because no one is gatekeeping anymore because we can't.
It really does remind me of tying into Paul's thing about music, because no band wants to be tiny, but man, is it cool to go see like some band that becomes famous later in a tiny little club. And there's like this energy where the fans all kind of know. I mean, they all know the band, they all know all those songs. And like then when they blow up, there's like fair weather fans. I can understand that sentiment, but then at the same time, you're like casting this wider net, both with music and with RPGs, where like, who knows how many number of people who would never have found it if it hadn't gone mainstream have come into the hobby and have like transformed it for the better.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel there's a big difference there, but being a small gig with a band that is small and then becomes big, there's like this nostalgia. You were there at the start, and there's a bit of that with D&D. But the thing, if you were playing D&D, you weren't at a venue with a few hundred people in a sweaty room. You were just with 5 of your mates around the kitchen table, and you kind of hoped that there were lots of other people playing it so it would survive, because you're going to move on and you're going to move to another town and you want other players.
But I think it still happens. I don't think it doesn't happen. I think what's that D&D like game that you bought at Gen Con this year, the one
Shadow
that
Dark.
Shadow Dark, yeah. Clearly Shadow Dark has a small community that has grown over time. Must have started pretty small. And clearly it's grown over time and it's created its own kind of community and fan base that until Gen Con, I knew nothing about. And there are many kind of, newer games, smaller communities that will have that kind of sense of, well, I was there at the start. It's now grown into something much bigger, and that's great. But, I remember the old days and it was fun then as well and all that. So I think it still happens. It just happens in a different way, perhaps.
Back then, it was almost like it was an oral tradition. You would only learn about role-playing games if you knew someone else in the same room that talked to you and told you about them, and you sat down with them and played it. Maybe, I don't know, maybe there's people out there that, there must be, right? People that just bought the book, didn't know anybody else who played it and read it and played the game. I'm sure that happened. It really turned my head when people turned up at a local club a few years ago, and I asked them, how did you find out about role-playing games? And they said, we watched Critical Role on YouTube. And I was like, what, so you don't know anybody that plays? And they were like, no, but we saw it on the internet. Oh, fantastic. Great. Come on in.
I had a really cool thing. So I run this Ship of the Dead meetup group here in Denver, and I use it to play test a lot of Pirate Borg stuff and whatnot. And I had a group last week, and they were like 3 new players. I could tell they were new. They were young, and they had that like look in their eye. And I was like, how'd you guys find about what have you guys played? You guys all played 5th edition D&D? And they're like, no. And they're like, Critical Role? They're like, no. Like, we've all played Morkborg, and we're here to play Pirate Borg. And I was like, whoa, we are in a new category now where there are like, this is like, they're like the kids that grew up with parents who grew up listening to punk. It's like a whole other thing where I'm like, I can't believe that there are people who are in the hobby who didn't start with D&D. Like I think that's a really good sign, but also very exciting.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, I guess I've been doing this job for like over 10 years now, working on Call of Cthulhu. So I've seen how people come into the game. And a lot of them play something else, whether it's D&D or whatever other game they played first. And then they kind of discover Call of Cthulhu and they start playing it. But for the longest time, people also play Call of Cthulhu because they've not played any other game before. And it's like, it can, for some people, be what we kind of call a gateway game, as in, they kind of are introduced to the hobby through Call of Cthulhu. People find that quite accessible. And therefore, it does, it in its own way does encourage people to give it a try sometimes. But obviously, it's got to kind of be put in front of them, whether it's they catch something on YouTube or they hear about it or whatever. But there is a surprising number of people where Call of Cthulhu is the first game they've really played that's a role-playing game.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess with that in mind, let's talk a little bit about Lovecraft. I mean, Mike, you talked about other authors that really inspire you when you were younger, but clearly there's something in the ether, if you will, about Lovecraft's work. Do you guys feel like, first off, what does Lovecraft's work mean to you both individually? But also, do you feel like he was just a first to this kind of cosmic horror vibe? Or would we if he had never lived, would we have a game in the slot of Call of Cthulhu that was something else? Or do you think like his presence in our existence is like very unique? And what do you guys think?
I mean, I think Lovecraft was a very interesting individual in terms of he had a lot of issues and hang-ups, and I think that informed him and his writing. And so if he hadn't have been around, would somebody else have created the same thing? I don't think it would be quite the same thing, because I think he is so idiosyncratic in terms of the way his life went. His family and his kind of views on the world were very much not just, they weren't caused by one thing. There was a number of things that kind of came together to kind of create the man that he became. I think a lot of those kind of concerns and worries are what came out in this kind of sense of alienation, this sense of existential threat, this sense of alienness that you get through his fiction. That I'm not certain would have been quite the same. I think he would have had something. I think you could have had something similar, but I'm not entirely sure you would have had exactly the same kind of sense of cosmic horror. Because I think he certainly was the first to really encapsulate that. I think we had authors previous to it who touched on it, maybe, but didn't really get into it in a big way. I'm thinking of Algernon Blackwood and things like people like him, that you get that sense of eldritchness from them, but it's not concrete. It's not carried through in the way that Lovecraft carries it through. What do you think, Paul?
To go off at a slight tangent, I was reading the other day about responses to artwork and how like people viewing the painting, The Girl with the Pearl Earring, a famous painting, how they had a different emotional response to that when they viewed it in person as to viewing a reproduction. And I think when I think back to reading Lovecraft stories, often I kind of remember the overview and the kind of the plot maybe. And I kind of, that's cool. And then I go back and I read it, and there's things in the story, somehow it evokes an atmosphere, his writing and the way, I don't know how he does it. The writing evokes an atmosphere of uneasiness, of a sense of wonder, of strangeness that I find it hard to take away from his stories. I try and sort of insert that feel into the game sometimes. You can't maintain it all the time, but it's a very evocative thing that he manages to capture somehow in his writing that I think is what, for me, sets him apart. As Mike mentioned, like Algernon Blackwood, the Willows, that's kind of got a strange atmosphere. And it was that strange atmosphere that I think was the definition of weird fiction, that sense of like what the hell is going on here? You know, I feel like the floor's dropped out from under me. I feel like I don't know where I am. I don't know what's, you know, it's not that I don't know what's going on. That's part of it, but it's more than that. It's a feeling of uneasiness, of cosmic horror, of all those things. You know, we can use lots of words for it, but it almost goes, you know, like good art does, it almost goes beyond, it's another language.
Often people criticize Lovecraft in terms of his prose, that, you know, there's all these adjectives and purple prose and all that kind of thing. But it almost seems that it's because of that. It's because of this kind of almost sense of overwriting that it actually builds this feeling. And if he hadn't written in that way, I don't think the stories would be perhaps as powerful as they are. And actually, the very thing that people criticize him for is actually the thing that makes the story deeper, in a sense, that kind of verbose prose. It kind of meshes together and kind of becomes something other, in a sense, like the stories, you know, and that, you know, that's just focusing on his style of writing rather than anything else you could criticize. But I think there's something very interesting goes on there, because I don't think I've encountered another writer, certainly who writes like Lovecraft, and I don't think I've discovered a writer that feels like Lovecraft in terms of the kind of that, as Paul says, it's that kind of strange double-sided coin of both uneasiness and wonder, which is a real hard thing to pull off, to have both happen almost at the same time. And that's what he does seem to be able to have done in not all of his stories, but certainly some of them.
It would be remiss of us not to, you know, also say that he was a man with very reprehensible views about race and so on. It's difficult to separate that out from, you know, the art from the artist. He's not by no means unique in that, but he made it very clear on the page, and particularly in his letters, he was an out-and-out racist. Lovecraft
gets, you know, is the kind of the one who's pointed to for this a lot, and quite rightly. But I mean, equally, Robert E. Howard, you read a lot of his stories, and the racism's on the page too. It's not just Lovecraft. There are, you know, plenty of writers where there's some problematic content for a modern reader, I think, you know.
It's interesting that I feel like you guys have done a really good job specifically dealing with this issue, but it's interesting in our like day and age where so many different people are getting like, you know, the cancel culture thing and whatnot. Somehow he has escaped that lens. Actually, I wanted to backtrack a bit here.
Yeah.
I mean, you're saying there's this sense of wonder and the sense of horror, but do you guys also feel like something about both Lovecraft's work, but also this part of the hobby is like weirdly cozy? Like, I feel like there's something about it that, I don't know.
I think there are you know, maybe a handful of Lovecraft stories that might lean towards the cozy side a little bit. But to be frank, I think Auguste Deleth's stories are more cozy than Lovecraft's. Auguste Deleth's stories, as far as I'm concerned, had far more impact on the creation of Call of Cthulhu, and certainly the early years of how the game kind of came about and its scenarios than Lovecraft's work, to be honest. I think Lovecraft's monsters are in there. I think that's his big contribution to the game, and the sense of the mystery and the kind of sanity mechanic are all, you know, pure Lovecraft. However, I think if you read Lovecraft's stories as opposed to Deleth's read much more like a Call of Cthulhu adventure. They read much more like about somebody going and battling the mythos rather than it destroying them. And so in the game, although your character can be destroyed by the mythos, there's also, you know, often ways to defeat the mythos in a sense in terms of your scenario. So I genuinely kind of believe that Auguste Deleth had a massive influence on the game in that sense. But again, it just comes down to how you read it.
I think for me, it's just that, like, I'm not talking about, like, it would not be cozy to live in one of these adventures or live in the world. But, like, when you are playing them, leaning in especially all the, like, you know, Tommy gun 1920s tropes and, like, you know, hey, I got a martini, you know, and like, oh, wait, don't read the book. And then, like, when they read the book, the thing that we all want to happen as players happens. Like, there's something very cozy about that to me. But it does seem weird given like the scope of what's happening to the characters, you know? I mean, it's the same way like how I feel like when I'm playing a D&D adventure and then there's a crypt and then there's like a necromancer lich is cozy, you know? It's maybe it's just the familiarity of it, you know?
I would say that. Paul, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things. I would say like horror as a genre, yeah, it starts when, you know, maybe when you're a kid and you go to the fun fair and there's the ghost train and those scares are like fun. It's kind of a little bit frightening, but we like that frisson of excitement. And then, if you watch a horror movie with the horror fan crowd, they love it. It's a fun activity. It's a kind of weird mishmash that you can try and sort of analyze. But also on the role-playing side, sometimes people talk about role-playing and it can be done seriously.
Sure.
And we talk about it, we can talk about it in very serious terms and, the psychology of at the table and everything like that. But then go back and look at the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons Dungeon Master's Guide. And a few pages in, there's a little cartoon of some player, like a fighter and a wizard. And they're putting on like Mickey Mouse ears and looking through a doorway, and there's like the mouse god and all these sort of anthropomorphic mice or something. And the fighter's saying to the wizard, do you think we'll get away with this? That's how you play D&D. That's how people played it. That's what happens at the table. It's not trying to make it some sort of, overly serious game. That's the reality of role-playing most of the time. Sometimes you can play very gritty, serious games, and that can be great. I'm not saying you can't. And I've played some great Call of Cthulhu games that have been, where we've kept it serious and it has been quite scary. But usually there's ups and downs in the tone, just like there is in a movie.
You can't role play unremitting terror every second of the game. It just doesn't work.
Yes.
Horror films don't work like that, and stories don't work like that. Yeah, Paul's absolutely right. Often, the analogy is a roller coaster, isn't it, with horror? It's fun and scary at the same time.
I want to talk a little bit about your guys' creative process. I thought maybe we could start, if we could, with a time machine, travel back to 2013-ish. What were your guys' design goals, and what was your creative process when you were conceptualizing Call of Cthulhu 7th edition? Are you thinking about an 8th edition? It's been another 10 years. And when you're writing new adventures, either together or separately, like what does your creative process typically look like? I know sometimes this is like capturing, magic in a bottle, but for our listeners who might be like trying to capture the same magic, where do you start?
So I think we started as fans of Call of Cthulhu. Mike was running a small group running Call of Cthulhu at conventions, and I was part of that group, and we were authoring scenarios. And there were certain things about the game. Well, we love Call of Cthulhu. We always have, and it's always been like our favorite game. Well, since we started playing it, right? But there were certain things about it that we would like to see changed. And I think that there was a few sort of design goals. We didn't maybe call them out at the time. One of them, and I think we achieved it, was to make some changes to the rules. But when you sit down and play it, and this is what most people say, it just feels like playing Call of Cthulhu always has, because they don't necessarily pull it apart and sort of see that the rules have changed a bit to sort of help the flow of the game. But the final outcome is, like a good Call of Cthulhu game always was. You still get that good experience. And hopefully, that was one of the design goals, to give you rules that help you produce that good experience and build interesting stories.
Yeah, I think my design goal, and the reason I approached Chaosium to start with, in terms of thinking of the idea to approach Chaosium, was because the 6th edition rulebook was terrible. I'm just going to say it's terrible. It was badly organized. It was all over the place. Rules were scattered everywhere. There was no order to it. You'd have a combat section, and then 20 pages later, you get some optional rules for combat, that kind of thing. And it was very much a case of a game that had grown over time and had been, all these additional cool things had been bolted on, but no one had actually took a step back and go, okay, what we need to do is just kind of rewrite this chapter to include this new stuff and, even it out and make it, consistent. Nobody had done that. It literally had just been bolted on and bolted on. We knew what it was, and we could understand and get a way around it because we'd been playing the game for 20 years. And we'd learned these new rules incrementally. But if you were a new player, somebody coming new to the game, it was not a friendly task to learn how to play Call of Cthulhu if you had no one teaching you and you were like a person in the store picking a book up. The answer to how do I keep the game alive that I like, the answer is always has to be get new players, because they're going to be the lifeblood that keeps the game going. Because otherwise it will just be me and my 3 sad friends, in our 70s, and we are the last people playing this game. So I was very keen to kind of ensure the game was translatable to a modern audience. And so for me, reorganizing the rulebook from the ground up was really one of the key design goals. And obviously within that, as Paul has said, there were rules that were a little bit confusing or actually nobody could agree on. Like, for instance, how do the grapple rules work? Nobody could agree. Literally nobody around the world could agree how those rules worked. So clearly there was an issue with some elements in the game that we felt, well, we could tidy that up and make it accessible, that people can all understand how grapple works or whatever it may be. And at the same time, make the book much more accessible, much more user-friendly, better organized, and therefore maybe appeal to a new generation of gamers, down the road. I mean, that was, for me, the starting point, really. And then we just started going through the book page by page, didn't we, Paul?
Yeah, literally, yeah.
So what about when you're doing now you're working on a new adventure, like you guys were just mentioning, you have some new adventures in the pipeline. What's the creative process for those look like?
So if it's coming up with an adventure of my own, a lot of my work for Chaosium is editing scenarios that Mike has had submitted, and then we work through them. That's a different kind of thing. But if I'm coming up with something for myself, I don't think it's one size fits all. It will be a different. The process will change from project to project. But essentially, it's finding a spark of an idea that excites me, and that could be to do with a setting and a period, but most often it's just a strange idea or a situation that I think, that's a really cool idea, and then kind of building out from there. And I've kind of developed some of my own sort of personal ways of trying to pull things apart and build things and put things together. But it is just mostly a laborious process of writing and sort of crafting things together and just following those things that feel exciting. And I will say, not trying to make what might be perceived as a traditional Call of Cthulhu scenario, because people sometimes get the impression that, it's a very investigative game. It's got to be like, I don't know, a murder at the mansion, and then, there'll be this clue, and then this clue, and then this clue, and then we'll find out who did it. It's almost like a whodunit. But I think what I would say is look at any horror film, for example, and take a seed from that and then just build the adventure. And it doesn't have to look like any other Call of Cthulhu adventure. And that's one of the great things about Call of Cthulhu, is that there is no strict setting. We do have settings like Arkham and so on, which are great settings books. Equally, you can just play it in the future. It's going to be set in 2030 in a made up town in Vermont. Whatever you want to do. It's in a spaceship. It's in the Roman era. It's in a cave 3 million years ago. It doesn't matter. You just take that horror and you set it wherever you want to set it. It's very flexible. Because I've had somebody say, I kind of like Call of Cthulhu, but I don't like the setting. And I'm like, what do you mean?
Well, the art that's in the core marketing materials does have a implied setting, but you're absolutely right that you could place that anywhere. For example, my first Call of Cthulhu game ever, for some strange reason, despite being a huge Lovecraft fan, was this year at Necronomicon, and you ran us through a very cool, futuristic, post-apocalypse adjacent adventure that you're writing. What's the name of that adventure?
A New Dark Age. That's in the latest Blasphemous Tome. That's in a fanzine with the good friends of Jackson Elias podcast. So that's already published. That's out.
Sure. Yeah. But for example, there were no tentacles, there were no Tommy guns, and it still felt extremely Call of Cthulhu to me. Good. Yeah.
Sorry, I gave you a below par experience there, Luke. No Tommy guns, no tentacles.
No, not at all. I thought it was great. Also from a gaming perspective, my descent into Lovecraft's side of things comes from more of the Arkham Horror, Mansions of Madness kind of board game. I have the Arkham Horror living card game, and the art in that is very much the setting that that you think people expect when they play Call of Cthulhu. But those tropes are not a requirement for this experience. Just like you could play D&D on a planet somewhere, or with like you said, cavemen and bones instead of swords and wizards. It's very adaptable for sure. Okay, so Mike, let's say you're making a new adventure, or the ones that you're working on now. Do you have any kind of rhyme or reason to how you get started and draft and then edit?
Partly because of the job I do. I'm thinking not only of what's a cool idea for a scenario, I'm also thinking who who is the scenario for? Because there isn't one audience for a game like Call of Cthulhu. There is a bunch of old grognards like Paul who've been playing for donkey's years and want a certain thing, which is something a bit different. Like Paul wrote and ran for you, a post-apocalyptic thing that's not set in the 20s, has no Tommy guns, because that will actually appeal to people who have been playing for a long time and want something a little different, something unexpected. And likewise, I've also got a whole bunch of people who have only just started playing Call of Cthulhu because they only bought the box, the starter set this year, and want something new to play. And so, there is a whole beginner market as well. And there's a whole bunch of people in the middle who are kind of getting past that beginner, but haven't quite yet been playing for 20 years. And so there's almost these kind of different kind of audiences in the Venn diagram, and kind of being aware of who am I writing this for helps me to shape the scenario. Because obviously, if I'm writing it for beginners, it's going to be probably a lot less complicated than something I'm writing for 20-year-old veteran players who will eat masks and arthotep for breakfast and want something far more kind of unusual in their face kind of thing. And so that will propel me down different avenues. So I like to kind of get an idea of that at the very start, because it tells me how much I need to work on this, how much work is going to be required to actually put something out, how much research, how big the scenario is. Is it going to be like a 10,000 word beginner scenario, or is it actually going to end up being a 200,000 word campaign? It's trying to just work out what would be cool. What would I think is cool as a player? I mean, that's ultimately the test for any game, isn't it? Would I enjoy running or playing this game? You've got to be able to answer yes to. Otherwise, why are you writing that one?
Yeah, why right here? Yeah. So after you've established like the core concept and the core audience, are you like writing on note cards? Are you drafting in Microsoft Word? Like, are you attaching strings on red strings in like a crazy den in your basement?
Everyone does it differently. I mean, what I do, I have a Word document, and what I do is I actually write headers. I literally, I write, introduction, keeper's secret information, scene 1, and then there'll be like a conclusion, and that'll be my skeleton. And then what I do is think, okay, so scene 1, because to me, what's often really important is that first scene. What's going to be the hook? What's going to get players excited to kind of continue? And so work on what the first scene looks like. And from the first scene, as I'm kind of sketching that out, will give me a sense of, well, what clues do people get in that first scene? Is it 1 clue? Is it 5 clues? And for each of those clues, that's going to then spur another scene later on. So I can then kind of populate that middle section with headers like as in the letter from Dr. Smith. So clearly there's a scene about Dr. Smith and finding about him and where he lives and what he knows. And there's a clue about the matchbook with the strange diagram drawn on it. Okay, well, there's going to be a scene then later on, which I'm going to write, matchbook at the restaurant or something. And so I'm filling in these headers. And as I go, I start to populate them, normally with bullet point lists and things like, must mention matchbook here, must mention this matchbook's links to X or whatever. So I've got the kind of the memory trail as I write. And then I kind of go back and then actually write the scenes. The way I work is I try to start at the beginning and work my way to the end. But as I go, if I hit something that changes what I've previously written, I will stop and go and change it in the moment. So it's all fresh and make sure the links are all living in that sense. So constantly back and forth over a scenario, kind of changing bits and as I kind of develop it and get a new idea and kind of backfill or, preempt something later on. That's the way I write. But I think that's very different to Paul.
The way you're describing that method kind of reminds me of like loading an image back in the day on the internet, where when you first click on it, it's like just squares and they're like different colors. And then it does another pass and then another pass. And there's more and more details. So you're like, rather than just like drawing each pixel one by one, you're actually kind of adding more and more layers to the thing.
Layers. Yeah.
For me, writing feels more like I'm beating my head against the keyboard until I'm so numb that I can't feel my face anymore. And then when I come back and my face is feeling again, I'm like, oh, wow, this is pretty good. That's how it feels to me. Well, Paul, do you want to touch on your actual process?
Yeah, I mean, it's usually either in like a notebook like this one, or I'm just writing into Word or whatever. And it's kind of quite scattershot, building up ideas and that feeling of like that first idea that I kind of get, and I'm thinking, oh, it'll be set in a modern day house, and it'll involve such and such. And then halfway through, I might decide, well, I don't really like that anymore. That I've found something more exciting. I kind of view it like digging for gold, in the hills. Some days it's just hard digging, and then you find a gold nugget, and then you start putting those together. And I think sometimes I've just developed little things that I do that work for me. Like if I'm stuck, then I'll think, well, there's this. I've identified a protagonist or somebody, and I'll sort of think, well, let's just look at it from their point of view, and I'll just start writing as if I'm them and what I think about what's going on, what they would know about the situation or what caused them to get involved with the mythos. I'm always looking for like that root cause of that. There's always going to be a seed of, well, okay, there's this cultist. How did they become a cultist? How did they get hold of this book? How did they contact this monster? Where did they learn this spell? And if you kind of go back to that root, it helps me understand the reasons for the scenario. Like you said, it's a bit like banging your head on the keyboard. I don't think there's any one way to do it. People always want to know the one way to do it, but I don't think there is any one way. It's the same as like when you hear novelists talk, they don't have one method. They all have different methods. Some plot it all out and have a structure and then go back and fill it in. So others are just, if they're called architects, I think, and others are like gardeners, they just plant a seed and then just let it grow and see where it goes. I think I'm more the latter.
Sure. This actually reminds me of, before I was in RPGs, I was in concert lighting. And I remember when I was young, when I was first getting started, my favorite lighting designer is Chris Kuroda. He's with Fish. And I was like, if I could just know how he lays out his console, because, he does everything live. There's no it's pre-programmed, but it's like he's picking everything live in the moment. It's like he's performing with the band, right? I'm like, if I could just know how he has it laid out, that would really give me a jump start. I'd really be able to get going in concert lighting, Of course, I didn't have that. And then I did lighting for 10 years. And then I started a lighting design podcast. And then I interviewed Chris at Madison Square Garden at his console. And they sent me all the screenshots from his console so I could know exactly how he did it. And by that time, I've developed my own thing. I've got my own shtick. And I get the files and I'm looking over and I ask them all these questions about how it's laid out. And I'm like, I would never do it that way. No way would I ever, and I that was like a very important moment in my overall life, not just my lighting life. And that someone can't hand you the secret. Like you have to go find it. It's just like a D&D quest. Like if they give you the magic item, it's not gonna be the same as if you go find it, Yeah. So I can very much identify with that. You can't be handed the solution to getting it out of your brain or out of the ether, as I keep saying. Yeah.
And I think alongside that, you can sort of say, if you want to do it, you can do it at home. Whoever is listening, watching, if you want to write a scenario and put it out there, just work at it. There's nothing stopping you. You can do it. With your own way of doing it, just do it.
I often feel there's a kind of an imperative for people nowadays. It's, I've got to write something and publish it. But we spent like 20 years writing stuff that was never going to be published because we wrote it for our own groups or we wrote it to run at conventions. And actually, that's that 20 years of writing is probably why we're kind of doing these jobs now, is because we build up a body of experience and knowledge that we now use in our professional life. And I think, people can be easy on themselves. They don't need to publish straight away. They can just write and enjoy the game and write for themselves, write for, give it to other people to run and all the rest of it, and not worry about self-publication or selling it or whatever to start with, but, grow into that as you develop. But obviously I hear a lot of people who want to publish, and that's great. But, don't lose out on all that kind of great experience you can get by just enjoying the game and writing for yourself to start with. You've got to start somewhere. But as Paul says, it's entirely doable. We're living proof that anyone can write anything. Anyone can write for a game. Don't feel compelled you've got to write, highly professional level stuff the first thing you write. Just write something that it's going to be fun to play and then go from there. And you'll soon be, putting stuff out, whether it's for Cthulhu or Pirate Book or whatever it is, you know what I mean?
It being fun is the most important part, not whether it was written for, mass publication. Yeah. If you've got that seat, this is just like the band jamming in the garage, If you're starting a band to make money, you're in the wrong business, I want to talk a little bit about your guys' podcast, Mason and Fricker's Eldritch Stories. Yes. Give us the elevator pitch for, we're speaking to a podcast audience. What are these people doing wrong? Why aren't the people who are listening to this and not listening to your show? What are they missing out on?
Weird short stories of about 5 minutes in length. Mike and I have written 6 each in season 1, and we each read each other's story. Yeah, that's what they are. What else should we say, Mike?
We have 12 episodes, which is just a story. And as Paul said, they're around about 5 minutes, 10 minutes at most. They are kind of almost micro-fiction. Each is a standalone weird/horror story. And in between that, so we release when we're in season, we release an episode every week. But on the off weeks between the stories, we do a chat, a bit like this, really. But it's just me and Paul talking about stuff. You know, what have we done recently? What have we seen? What do we like? What do we don't like? Normally, that's most of the time is me correcting Paul on which films Arnold Schwarzenegger has been in, as opposed to Sylvester Stallone. But other than that, we just sort of shoot the breeze and do a kind of a podcast / video, catch up chat. But the juicy stuff is the actual stories that happen every other week. And I said we did season 1 last year, and we are literally putting the finishing pieces together to start a season 2, which I guess will be happening in the new year.
Are they like mythos related? Are any of them like very easily converted to adventures, or are they just whatever you guys want?
I wouldn't say they'd convert to adventures. You might take them as a seed for an adventure, but they're not really an account of an adventure. They're more just sort of short, strange stories. Each one's very different. They're all standalone. There are, certainly in mine, there's 1 or 2 places where it's sort of tangentially linked to the mythos, or could be linked to the traditional kind of Call of Cthulhu mythos. There are 1 or 2 links there, but that's not the objective. But we're happy, if it kind of works out that way, fine, but that's not the objective to do that any more than you go back to the source of Lovecraft and those other writers. A lot of their stories didn't link together.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Same for me. There's a few stories I've done. If you look between the lines, there's a mythos connection potentially, either overtly or not overtly at all. But there's also kind of folklore and stuff like that, which again, I think we're not kind of like making it so obvious to people, but it's there if you listen and you kind of do a little bit of thinking around what we're talking about, and maybe even do a little bit of research, like a Cthulhu investigator. You'll see that some of the stories have a basis in either some myth or folklore, or a mythos story potentially. So there are links, but they're not overt, and we try and make people work for it, I guess, is what we're saying. But yeah, they're seeds. We could probably pull out a handful each and go, well, with that, I could probably base that as my first scene of the scenario, or have a rough idea of where I might take that into a scenario. And some others probably don't at all, that they're just weird stories that you kind of are going to listen to.
We've actually talked a lot about music this episode, but I want to have a quick little interlude. I know, Paul, you and I both love Yes. Mike, are you a big music guy?
Yeah, but my music tastes, there's some overlap with Paul, but not a huge overlap. I think we can all agree we like Marillion from the sounds of it, and Fish.
No, he's on about a different Fish, Mike.
Oh, he's on that. Oh, not that Fish. Oh, that shows my age then. There you go.
PHISH.
Oh, that
little jam band from Vermont. Yeah.
I'm with you now.
Well, so what have you guys been listening to? What's on the playlists lately? Is there any specific music that you listen to while you're writing, or that inspires your Lovecraft adjacent gaming?
I can't listen to vocals when I'm writing. It has to be silence, to be frank. But But in terms of I've been listening to, I got the new album from Public Service Broadcasting, which is a kind of like many of their albums, like a concept album, which is all about Amelia Earhart's Last Flight. So each of the tracks is kind of something to do with that and Amelia Earhart. That's pretty good.
Cool.
I also, this was actually a present given to me. I got the Unthanks in Winter, their kind of Christmas double album kind of thing. That's my latest purchases, I guess, or latest acquisitions. What about you, Paul? You don't listen to music past 1972, do you?
If you're coming to me for new music, you've come to the wrong place. You're going to be sorely disappointed.
I didn't say new. Maybe new to us, you know?
I mean, like Mike, I don't tend to listen to stuff with lyrics when I'm writing, or if I do, then it's stuff that I'm so familiar with that it just kind of drifts over me. Like Yes or something like that. I've been listening to Omadorn a lot by Mike Oldfield. It was something I was aware of, and I think, Tubular Bells and all that I really like. But then I listened to Omadorn a couple of times, and that second half, when it really ramps up the tempo in about the second half, halfway through the second half of the album, and I just love it. It's just great. So much energy to it. Other than that, I don't know. Last year I listened to, it took quite a long time, quite a lot of months. I listened to all of Frank Zappa's music on Spotify.
Oh, nice. Very cool. Love Zappa.
I'd always struggled I love Frank Zappa and his music. I'd always struggled to get my head around his body of work. Because if you listen to one of his live albums, you pick a live album, you can't do that on stage anymore or whatever. Well, that's not a good example because they often were a particular album, but Shake You Booty or something like that. It'll be tracks from 1978, and then the next track will be from 1969, then the next one will be from 1981. And it's like, well, that's not what he was doing at that time. At the same time that he was putting out, some crazy albums, he was also putting out some classical albums and stuff like that. So, but listening to his whole work from start to finish, which is like hundreds of hours on Spotify, I kind of started to get to grips with him and his work, and that was just really rewarding. And it's just such a fascinating body of work and such a productive and creative and sort of singular individual. Yeah.
Yes, very extremely prolific.
God, yeah. Yeah.
So what are you guys working on? What's coming up? What's in the pipeline for you individually and for Chaosium?
The most recent thing has been Cthulhu by Gaslight, the new edition, which we've just released the Investigator's Guide, which is a kind of player-facing, includes the rules, kind of, you only need this book to play Call of Cthulhu in the Victorian era. So that's just come out, and we've got that's followed up in the new year fairly soon with the Keeper's Guide, with scenarios and all the kind of secret sauce for running late Victorian Cthulhu games. That's what, has been occupying mine and Karis McDonald's time for a while in the team. But I'm currently finishing, what I'm working on at the moment is the Innsmouth book, which is the follow-on to the Arkham book, which links seamlessly into Arkham because it's just up the road from Arkham. But provides all that good salty sea horror for strange goings on in quaint little Innsmouth. So that's literally what I'm finishing off at the moment, and we'll get into kind of art and maps and things like that at the beginning of the new year.
Now, Mike, I know that the Innsmouth book is probably in modern era-ish, but do you think our Pirate Borg listeners might be able to adapt this to a earlier version of Innsmouth?
The actual time the Innsmouth book is set is 1922. A lot of the information is very easy. It would be very easy to tweak it back a couple of 100 years or so. Maybe change the gold refinery to something else and the fish packing plant into, maybe just do away with those and turn them into some more kind of like cotton industry or textiles. But other than that, the main trade of Innsmouth is the sea. So that's the same whether it's 1922 or 1640. So you can easily backward date if you want to kind of spin it out and play use the setting beyond Call of Cthulhu into Pirate Borg or whatever.
I guess one of the main reasons I ask is because in the Kickstarter we just finished, there's an adventure called Into the Maelstrom, which is it's a vampire adventure. But the backstory for this guy, how he became a vampire, is that he's the son of a Innsmouth fisherman who was, born of deep ones. Yeah. And he falls in love with a Salem witch because they totally line up time-wise and geographically. But then, in his quest to save her after being persecuted in the witch trials, he finds a vampire in a cave and his deep one ancestry transforms him. So I'm like, this is a perfect, there's so many crossover here. That just got to get him at the right timeline. So
absolutely. I mean, and that's just talking about, the town. But obviously in the book as well, we also talk about Nethle, the deep one city just off the coast beyond Devil Reef. Yes. Which if you want to start, going exploring the airfield chambers of the upper parts of the Deep One City, then you can. So yeah, that's all good stuff.
I can't wait. What is there a timeline for that?
It will be probably the maybe late Q3, Q4 next year, all being well. We've just got to get all the art in and then lay it out. So first half of the year is finishing it.
Speaking of art and of the Arkham book, I do want to give a shout out to Matt Ryan. I've got to know Matt over the years he's at basically every show we do. I played some D&D with him 2 days ago, but Matt he's your like on staff cartographer, right? He does all the maps, and he was showing me at Necronomicon a couple years ago, he was showing me how he had to go through and like kind of reconcile all of the real cartography with places that Lovecraft had mentioned. And I just thought that was so cool to see, like so he's like, yeah, so Matt, for you guys who don't know, Matt is like almost 7 feet tall. He's got a big white mohawk and a mustache. Hi, Matt, if you're listening. Just to hear him talk about where to place these things as a Lovecraft fan and a cartographer myself, I just thought this is so cool that you guys give that level of detail into these adventures.
Well, I mean, it's a hyper detail this time because this last summer, the three of us, me, Paul and Matt, where we drove to what I've worked out as the real world location of Innsmouth. So we drove out there in the summer to look at, this place that's on the kind of like a hill with these kind of dips and dives and these streets and all that kind of thing. So we've got it in our head for how to actually visualize Innsmouth, which obviously Matt is taking to then draw in cartography in terms of not only 2D, but what's it kind of look like in 3D? How does the elevations work? So that's all good stuff that's kind of been churning in the pot, and we'll start to kind of put some flesh on that in the new year, basically. Great. But that's all Innsmouth and fishy stuff. But Paul, I guess you've been doing this with the Scouts and getting badges and stuff like that.
Yeah, 1920s American Scouting Association. So you're playing teenage scouts, investigating Call of Cthulhu.
That sounds fun.
It's kind of the touchstones might be a combination of Stranger Things and Scooby-Doo, but with that, Eldritch horror twist. So there's a few rules changes to kind of hit the right kind of tone with the game. There's like 4 adventures in the book. And then once you've played those 4 scenarios, by that time you kind of played Campfire Tales, as it's called, and you're grown up, and your scouting group can now go off and maybe, investigate Master Nyarlathotep or something like that.
That's really cool.
So it's kind of a springboard for your adventurers to start off as kids, and then
it's like a level 0 campaign, if you will.
Yeah, that's it.
Because each scenario takes place a couple of years later. So you kind of start as 12, 13-year-olds, and then you're 15, 16, and, grow. You grow
like
with
seasons of a TV show where you watch Stranger Things the next year, and suddenly the kids are older and they're facing different challenges.
Yeah.
Hold fast, wretched sailor. We brace for the broadside barrage.
First RPG system you ever played?
So Advanced Dungeons and Dragons.
Basic D&D.
Most recent RPG system you've played?
I'm going to say Dragonbane.
Call of Cthulhu.
I'm going to assume 7th edition.
Yeah.
You're like, yeah, Luke, of course. I guess that does present a question for me, though. Like, is there nostalgia for older editions in the Call of Cthulhu community like there is in the D&D community?
There is occasion when people forget to take off their rose-tinted spectacles. They have they look fondly at some older material. I mean, I've played some really old basic D&D. Last year, I was running some really old modules I ran when I was a kid and really enjoyed, and we had a great fun doing it. So, there is a fun to be had there, but I think for me anyway, I can't speak for everyone else, but it's a temporary thing because I want to get back to the proper gaming thereafter. I don't get stuck in the old, because there's a reason why new editions come out, because they fix things and there's less arguments at the table when people can't agree on how to do something.
I mean, like I said, I've only played once, but I have both the books. It seems like Call of Cthulhu is a little bit more of a like distillation and refinement of a similar experience, where D&D has like kind of gone to different directions, and the people who liked it back here want a different thing.
I think the various editions of D&D, particularly looking at, say, 4th edition, gave you a different table experience. So it wasn't just that it was, the rules slightly changed. It produced a different experience. And some people love that. And it just depends on what you're looking for. Whereas Call of Cthulhu, over the various editions, I think the aspiration of experience at the table hasn't really changed.
I mean, the other massive difference is you can run a first edition Call of Cthulhu scenario with 7th edition.
Yeah, sure.
Literally on the fly without any preparation in terms of the mechanics. So it's never had the same backwards compatibility issue that D&D, as Paul said, each edition is kind of a new thing. And so we've never really experienced that with the Call of Cthulhu kind of game. But, certainly other games I've played, that's obviously a thing. But yeah.
My next question actually is favorite edition of Call of Cthulhu besides 7th?
Probably 2nd, because that was the one I started with.
I mean, before 7th edition came out, nobody talked about Call of Cthulhu editions because it was all one edition. It was the same game with some little bolt-ons, as I've said before. And it's only when 7th edition came out and it was somewhat different in certain mechanics that people started to talk about, I've always played 4th edition. Well, for 30 years, no one has ever said that until now. It's a strange kind of thing that happened. To me, in my mind, there's been 2 editions of Call of Cthulhu. It's been what we call 1st edition, which is 1st through 6th, and then 7th edition.
RPG that you haven't played that you would like to try?
I haven't played Liminal. I'd quite like to play Dr. Mitch's, Paul Mitchener's Liminal.
A folk horror game called Solemn Veil, which I've got, but I've not had a chance to read it, and I've not had a chance to play it, but I would quite like to give that a go.
Have either of you played 10 Candles?
Yes.
Yeah, I like it. I haven't played that for a while. I'd like to play that again, actually. Yeah.
Or how about, have you played Dread?
With the Jenga Tower?
No.
With the Jenga Tower, yeah.
Okay, no.
Yeah, Dread is a cool horror game usually because you have a Jenga tower, and every time, instead of making rolls, every time you have to do something difficult, you have to pull a block, and if the tower falls over, your character dies. So they have to be very important rolls, and then when the tower falls over, you rebuild it and pull X number of blocks and keep going.
Do you have one tower per player?
It's a group tower, and when it falls for one person, they're dead, and then the rest of the group rebuilds it. Yeah.
I'm not sure I can buy into that concept personally. I don't think that my concept, my focus would be on playing Jenga rather than the game. How do I screw over another player if I do that and all that? I don't know. I don't think it would translate for me in the same way, perhaps. But
you can.
Maybe,
also, you can always decide to not pull and automatically fail whatever you're doing. The thing I've found is that if you're playing with a GM who calls for too many pulls, or you mess up early, your character dies like trying to unlock a door, which is kind of silly. So, if you were a 4th level character in a fantasy RPG, what class would you be?
I'd be a wizard of some kind or an illusionist, because I quite like playing spellcasters, even though they're kind of a bit more complicated. I kind of, in my head, going back to that thing of, what you think you want to role play and what you actually end up doing. In my head, I started off as an illusionist, and I thought it's really cool being able to deceive people with tricks and spells and illusions. But what I like doing is shooting lightning bolts and fireballs and blowing shit up.
Normally, my go-to is a fighter, because I haven't got to learn any ridiculously complex spellcasting rules. I can get straight in the combat. I can often, be heroic and save the party by taking on the monsters or whatever, or, be injured and then be this tragic figure, or a necromancer, because the necromancers are just cool. I'm just going to raise an undead army and they can do all the work, and I shall sit around on my throne carried by skeletons. Maybe not quite 4th level, but maybe I have one skeleton retainer who will follow me around. That may, I tell you what I won't be anymore, certainly not in the current edition of D&D, is a rogue thief, because it's the most boring class in the world now. Literally,
it's funny because I would have thought you would have said rogue, but I guess
I would have done. But I had such a bad experience a year or two ago playing a rogue in a long running D&D game. It was just the dullest experience I've ever had role playing in terms of D&D. All I did was just every door, check for traps, and that was my role in the game, and it was dull. So I've kind of warded off playing them any more. But yeah, I do like playing rogues, but it's got to be, the system's got to kind of really support it well, I think.
Sure. Favorite Lovecraft monster? We could expand that to favorite Call of Cthulhu monster if you've got one that in game that you want to reference.
I mean, it's always fun to break out a Dark Young, because they're big the party, if you've got a party with, Tommy guns and all that sort of stuff, they can possibly take one out, but more likely they're going to get stomped. It's something you're probably going to get saved till the end of the game. So that's like a big card to play. Smaller scale, I'd say ghouls, because they're so flexible and they're human. Yeah, they're tough, but they're kind of human scale. But also the players can converse with them and maybe side with them. Obviously, it's a tricky balance. It's not, it's a kind of a deal with the devil, but ghouls are fun things to have around.
I like ghouls too, but there's two monsters you can guarantee will have a dramatic effect on the players immediately. And one is Stark-Young, as Paul said, but even better than that is a Shoggoth. Because you bring a Shoggoth out and people suddenly get very serious about how they're gonna exit this scene immediately and not get eaten. So I quite like Shoggoths.
I love it. I mean, I feel like one of my happy places is listening to Wayne June read Mountains of Madness, and just the Shoggoth stuff. I'm like, yes, tell me more. Favorite Lovecraft story, if you could pick one.
Right now, I'm going to go with the Dunwich Horror. It kind of changes. It used to be other ones, but the Dunwich Horror has got so much in it. It does feel more like a Call of Cthulhu game. There's a bit more of that in it. There's some great characters. Old Man Whately, inspired the film, the Dunwich Horror, which we watched at the Necronomicon in Providence in
every 2 years. Oh my God, it's amazing.
Yeah. So what's not to love?
Have you guys seen this from Free League?
Yeah. Nice. Very nice.
Francois Berenger. This is like a Dunwich Horror, but it's got like the most amazing art in this.
It's fantastic.
It's lovely. Yeah. There's a Mountains of Madness too.
I think that's the one I've got, the Mountains of Madness one. Yeah.
Yeah. He's got, the Mountains of Madness has a 2-volume, and he also has Call of Cthulhu. Me, as Mr. Pirateborg, I'm just waiting on Shadow over Innsmouth, right?
Of course. Yeah. Yes. If I'm hanging out with highbrow literary types, and obviously what I would say is the Colour Out of Space, because that, is the distillation of cosmic horror. However, if I'm in the pub with friends, I will actually say the Dunwich Horror, because that is my favourite.
Dunwich Horror is good. What did you think about the Nick Cage movie, Colour Out of Space?
It was fun.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. I thought it was great fun.
I had a question for you guys earlier. Like, are we ever going to see like a Chaosium produced Lovecraft movie? Like, how come we haven't got a for real Call of Cthulhu movie yet? What's going on?
Well, yes, I would like that to happen. Yes. I'd like to. Yes, I would like that to happen, but it hasn't happened yet.
Hollywood, if you're listening, come talk to.
Yeah, Del Toro wanted to make Mountains of Madness. So
I know he did. I know. Yeah.
Maybe he'll come back to it. Who knows?
Okay, add an entry to the What's in the Cargo Hold of the Ship of the Dead D100 table.
There's a chest, a locked chest, which you've got a key to around your neck. And when you open it up, there's your own head inside it. And its eyes slowly roll up and look at you. And it talks, obviously.
I mean, like that's like a full adventure, right? It's ready to go, Mike?
There's a kind of like a slop bucket with some kind of something in it that's wrapped in rags. And when you unwrap it, you find this kind of bandage wrapped severed hand that is alive. And what the hand does, it kind of taps a message, or maybe, scrawls something on the wooden table about how it's looking for its owner. And what you've got to realize is that the hand will work for you, and it'll go off and go and do things for you. Go and find out information running around like that. But actually, its owner is kind of come looking for it, and the owner's going to want to know what you've been doing with the hand and exact some sort of compensation or revenge, depending on what you've been doing with it.
Favorite size die? Well,
it doesn't get used that much in Call of Cthulhu.
Don't say D12. Don't say D12.
No, I'm not kind of. Well, why would I say D12?
Well, I don't know. You're about to say something crazy.
I was about to say D20. Yeah, there's something. I guess because I started with AD&D, there's an excitement in rolling a 20.
There is, but that doesn't.
Don't say D4.
It doesn't beat the D100, because the amount of when you roll a 0, 1 or a 100. it has an amazing effect to the gaming table.
But to be clear, you're saying 2D10, not the football-sized D100 thing that just rolls forward.
Yeah, I'm saying 2D10.
Right.
That's a totally acceptable answer though. Yeah. I don't necessarily mean what favorite size polyhedral, although that could be how you interpret the question. It's interesting to me. This question always provokes, like, especially when I have multiple guests on, it's either like unanimous, like often I get a unanimous, everyone wants D12, or it's like this, where it's like war. Like one guy wants anybody who says D4 is obviously going to be contentious against some groups. Yeah. RPG or fantasy setting you would most want to live in?
That's easy. It wasn't an RPG setting, but it'd be Hobbiton.
Well, none of them are particularly nice, are they? Because it's all RPGs are about drama. I guess
conflict. Yeah.
Yeah, but I guess Golden Sky Stories. If you wanted a quiet life, Golden Sky Stories, where you're basically playing a kind of living in a Studio Ghibli type world where it's lots of fluffy animals and can talk and everything's fine. But I think, although it's a safe environment, it'd be pretty boring. I think you get bored because without the drama and without, I think it could be bored. So, I mean, I think Forgotten Realms, I guess, would be quite interesting. There's plenty of ways to get into trouble. You could start, maybe set yourself up as some sort of wizard hunter.
Forgotten Realms, there's lots of cozy places. There's lots of challenges. Yeah. There is lots of chances for adventure and a very low chance of permadeath, right? So that would be...
Yeah, it's resurrection.
Like if you're in Forgotten Realms, you can get resurrected all day long. I mean, if you ever play any of the video games, it's like dying is not... I mean, even at the table, dying is, almost never permanent in Forgotten Realms. So. Okay, this is a good one, and I think you guys will actually get it because most people don't understand what I mean when I ask this question.
Okay.
How do you like your stars? Trek, Wars, or When They Are Right Again?
I mean, I like all of those. I grew up with Star Trek, repeated episodes on the BBC, I think. Yeah, on the BBC. Just random Star Trek episodes, and that was fantastic. And then I was out one day and I convinced my mum to buy me the novel of Star Wars. And I read that again and again and again before I got to see it at the cinema. And then, the stars are right. So if I had to pick one just for entertainment, it'd be Star Wars.
Shocking.
Wait, new headline now. Chaosium editor refutes love of...
Shocking. I just thought you were going to say Star Trek, which is obviously the correct answer.
It's no Star Wars.
However,
Ben Kenobi and...
well, the thing is, I can watch Star Trek again and again and again, but Star Wars, I have to have a gap between them because, it gets a bit samey. But I think, if I want to combine it with the Eldritch, then I'd watch Babylon 5 because that has both... I like Babylon 5 quite a lot.
It feels very Mike Mason for me for you to give an answer that wasn't one of the options.
Yeah, it wasn't stars, Mike. Stars.
I don't accept the premise of the question.
Paul, we didn't really mention this, but Paul and Mike and I do a biannual Pirate Borg live play. And Mike is so good at turning my no, you can't do that into yes, you can do that. It always amazes me, their ability to do that. It's really fun to watch too on stream. Favorite fantasy movie, TV show, or book? Actually, you know what? I'm going to pivot. Let's go with horror because that's more appropriate for you two. Favorite horror movie, TV show, or book?
Evil Dead.
The first one.
Yeah, the first one. The one that's actually a horror film.
Off the top of my head, The Witch. It's a more modern, probably 10 years old now, but...
Favorite libation or beverage during your RPG sessions?
Well, there's two. It's either going to be cider, which I make myself, or a White Russian.
Yeah, it'd be a White Russian, but if there's no... if that's not available, then I imagine a nice bitter beer.
I can just imagine the two of you, sitting around old London town, playing Call of Cthulhu, in a Charles Dickens room, drinking White Russians, writing Eldritch Stories. I just
that's exactly what we do. That's most weekends.
That's exactly your lives. Video game or computer game that you've logged the most hours playing?
I'm not big on computer games. Probably fucking Asteroids or something. 1978.
I love that.
In the before times, when you had to pay money in an arcade machine, my favorite game of all time was Defender. But in the after times when you could play for kind of free, other than buying some sort of setup, I guess I've logged the most hours on playing Call of Duty Zombies. It's a great way to end the day because you can just turn it on and shoot zombies without any worry. I spend all day worrying about plots and clue trails and all that, and I can turn that game on. It's got none of that. Just none of that. I can literally just run around and try not get eaten.
Well, Paul, Mike, thank you so much for being on the show. I look forward to seeing you guys in the future. Where can people find out about you? Paul, we didn't mention your Substack. If you want to plug that, where can they find the podcast? Tell us all that good stuff.
Okay. Yep. So as you said, I've got a Substack. That's at paulfricker.com. We've got our podcast, which is at eldritchstories.com. And we both work for Chaosium, which you'll find at chaosium.com. So it's all fairly straightforward, I hope.
I have a Substack that I can't remember what do you know what it is?
I didn't see it immediately when I looked at
Mike Mason something, probably it's Substack, probably. But
it'll be linked from mine somewhere.
Yeah, you can find it via Paul's, but you can also find both of us by the eldritchstories.com, and you can find us both on Facebook and Blue Sky, where I am I'm Mike of Cthulhu on Blue Sky.
And I'm just
excellent.
at Paul Fricker on Blue Sky.
Awesome. Great. Well, anything else you guys want to mention before we wrap up?
In a future expansion for Pirate Borg, Luke, I want to see the teeth mechanic expanded.
We have talked about the teeth mechanic a lot.
Yeah.
So
have you?
Just
Brilliant.
Well, just because it was so for listeners who haven't seen the episode, we'll link the episode in the show notes. But basically, Paul wanted to do something with his teeth in this episode. What did you want to do?
I wanted to bite through a chain because I was chained to a rock.
So he's chained up.
Old Zadok wanted to bite through the chain. So you made me roll 2d20 to see how many teeth I had.
Yeah, like I'm pretty bad at guessing the right size die for things when I have to do it live, except that this was perfect because in a Pirate Borg adventure, like, the normal human has 32 teeth, right? So but you could have 40, like they could be wood or gold, who knows? And you roll. And so the mechanic was you rolled 2d20 to see how many you had. And then every time you wanted to do something that cost teeth, you would roll and lose that many teeth in the process. Yeah. Oh my God, it was amazing.
I rolled 31, which for old Zadok, I feel was a pretty good score.
In the Dark Caribbean, dude, 31 teeth. That's uncanny.
It's amazing.
You see, when you were doing that, in my head, I was thinking of a whole other kind of plot strand that I didn't mention at the time because obviously it would have kind of broken the game a bit. But I can mention it now. Is I had this idea that and I'm drawing on Jason and the Argonauts, the teeth that make the Hydra. Yeah. And I'm thinking old Zadok loses all these teeth and they fall out on the ground, they scatter. But they're infused with weirdness, and somebody else comes, like another adventuring party. They come on, they find these teeth and they all do something a bit weird and different. I'm thinking that could be another table of random goodness.
But you have to put the teeth into your mouth. Is that what
you got to, you got to, You got to. If you've not got a space, you've got to rip one out and put it in the hole.
So like the teeth of Vecna now or something.
Yeah, teeth of Vecna.
The teeth of Vecna, yes.
You've been listening to the Ship of the Dead podcast. Email your questions, comments, and buried treasure tips to shipofthedead@limithron.com. You can support the program, join our Discord server, get early access to new episodes, and instantly download hundreds of battle maps, assets, and adventures at limithron.com/Patreon. Tiers start as low as $2 a release, and you only get charged when I make something new. Pirate Borg, my rules-light, rum-infested hack of Morkborg, is available now at pirateborg.com and retail stores everywhere. Ship of the Dead is produced by Limithron LLC, our audio editor is Matt Kepler, and our music is by Alexander Miller. For more, head to limithron.com.